Hey ladies, how's it going? Welcome back to another video. Thank you so much for kicking back with me here today. Today, I thought it would be fun to take a look at Rancid's history. Now, I've covered Rancid a lot of times here on the channel, but I don't want to do just like a straight up Rancid Wikipedia read. I would rather watch Finn McKenty do a Rancid Wikipedia read. So I think that is going to be very fun for us today to take a look at Finn McKenty navigating the waters over here of a Rancid. So before we get going, I'm going to get you to hit like and press subscribe. Did those buttons just flash down below? They're supposed to flash when you say those words. Anyway, okay, let's go.
Who are you?
I'm Nardwar.
No, you are Lars?
From Rancid.
Oh, of course we had to get that B-roll right at the beginning, get that Rancid B-roll. Might as well get somebody interesting like Nardwar to tell us something or two. Oh my god, this intro kills me, man. How many seconds worth of time did we waste before we even kicked into this video?
What's up, everybody? I'm Finn McKenty. This is the Punk Rock MBA, and in my personal opinion, Rancid may be the single most underrated punk band of all time. Because although everyone obviously...
The most single underrated punk band of all time, they're pretty heavily rated. Highly rated, I would say. One of the highest rated punk bands of all time, in my estimations. I'm not too exactly sure where he's pulling this from, but let's just watch him continue to justify this.
Obviously knows who they are. I don't hear their name come up as often as it probably should. Because other than maybe Green Day, I can't think of a band that did more to get real, legitimate DIY punk rock onto radio and MTV and into millions of households all over the world and expose a whole generation of people to the culture.
Of course, that is exactly who Rancid are, and that is exactly what Rancid did. So in the same breath to call them underrated is ridiculous because they're very much recognized for all of those things. They are known to be the band that didn't take the major record label that then swooped in Green Day. They could have been Green Day before Green Day, but they decided to do the whole Rancid thing first. They are not underrated by any stretch of the imagination. I think they get just about as many flowers as you think a band like Rancid would get. And then maybe Finn McKenty doesn't pay attention so much to the wrestling world, but Rancid is very much mentioned a lot over there as well. Almost like a common occurrence. We see Lars Frederiksen walk wrestlers to the ring. This is TNA Wrestling from 3 days ago. We have Rancid play wrestlers to the ring. No, I can't really show the footage or whatever because this belongs to AEW and they are crazy about their copyright, but there they are. There's Rancid on an AEW stage, getting the lower third and everything. Legendary punk rock band with 4 million plus records sold, Rancid. Oh yeah, here they are, playing a wrestler to the ring. Who's that wrestler? That wrestler happens to be a little wrestler known as Ruby Soho. Named herself after an iconic song and is embracing it in the year 2024. Underappreciated, unrecognized, my ass, Finn McKenty. Lars has a wrestling podcast. He's best friends with CM Punk. Blah, 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 blah. I never stop hearing about Rancid.
They proved that ska punk didn't have to be corny kids from Orange County, adding a horn section to basic pop punk songs.
Well, they were corny kids from California adding horns to basic pop punk songs. What are you talking about? That is exactly what they did. They just made it cool.
Sold millions and millions of albums without ever compromising on the sound and values of punk. Something that I really don't think any other band has done before or since.
Agreed. That is absolutely 100% true. So why did you just say they were underrated and underappreciated when you're giving them this amount of flowers in the very next sentence? And these are the amount of flowers that they get in the scene. This is the credit that they get.
But as is always the case with any band that comes along like that, they also got a ton of backlash from the punk elite who didn't want anyone else coming into the scene and didn't like seeing punk on MTV or used in the background of shampoo commercials.
It wasn't a Rancid song that was in the back of a shampoo commercial. They were very much being accepted by both kinds of people. Not fully accepted by the mainstream, just kind of, and not fully accepted by the punk community, but just kind of. But it was that perfect little Venn diagram that Rancid carved out that made them able to be Rancid. And that Fructus commercial that he's talking about didn't happen until years after Rancid were already a thing, years after Rancid already established themselves as Rancid in the scene, so much so that they could go out and do side projects with the Transplants. Travis Barker, hear of him? That's where the Fructus thing comes from. Where is this guy coming from, brother?
So the question is, how did they do it? How did Rancid go from being a scrappy little Gilman band to all over MTV? How bad was the backlash? And most importantly, what is their lasting impact and legacy?
I hope those are the questions that we're going to be exploring in today's video.
Those are the questions that I will answer in this video.
Oh, I can't wait. I can't wait for you to answer all the questions about the band that you don't even really seem to fully understand from the very just beginning of this intro over here.
But to answer all those questions, I need to start at the very beginning and explain where Rancid came from.
Let's go right back to the very beginning. Are we going all the way back to the year 0? Back to where Jesus was born? Are we going back even further than that? We're going back to the very beginning. Are we going back to the Neolithic times, the Paralithic times, whatever that means, cavemen and that kind of thing?
The story starts with a band called Operation Ivy.
Oh, okay, we're not going back that far. We're just going back to Operation Ivy in the 80s and Gilman in California. Got it. That's not the very beginning, Finn McKenty.
From Berkeley, California, which had Tim Armstrong and Matt Freeman on guitar and bass respectively.
Respectively. No mention of Jesse. We don't need to mention Jesse at all. Throw the most charismatic front person to ever do it under the bus or anything. No, wouldn't want to do that.
And Operation Ivy was only active for a few years, from 1987 to 1989. But
I like how he got that correct. I didn't think that he was going to get that correct, because that's in a Rancid song. That is very well documented. Started in 87, ended in 89. You got to be not paying attention to your surroundings to not know that.
In that short period of time, they made a huge impact on the scene. I personally heard them in 1991 when a friend of mine from school played them for me, and
oh, you're an old head, Finn McKenty. You were there from the very beginning. Oh, I heard about these guys right from day one. I was there when they were there, okay? I am basically Rancid.
I was instantly hooked.
Sound System, awesome song. Operation Ivy, amazing band. Like, absolutely generational. I will be spinning this thing until the end of time.
I had never heard anything like it, and I didn't know what ska was. So I was just like, what is this? Is this like punk reggae? I didn't know what to call it, but the songs were just undeniable. They were so energetic and fun, so catchy, and the band started to get noticed right away.
Oh, they sure did. But didn't he say that he saw Rancid in 91 and now he went right into talking about Operation Ivy and Lookout without kind of doing that transition? Got kind of muddy there. He was like, oh, it started with Operation Ivy, but I got into Rancid in 1991, and then we went back to Operation Ivy without that kind of narrative thread to bring us back there, because my brain went to Rancid when his script went to Rancid, right? And now we're going back again to the 80s to look out for Operation Ivy, apparently. Okay, following. Got it.
He quickly signed to Lookout Records, the future home of bands like Green Day and Screeching Weasel, and almost immediately became one of the label's biggest selling bands. And on the back of that success, they were offered a major label contract, which they turned down.
Yeah, they were not into that. That is correct. That is the story of how it goes. These guys got really popular, super popular, even more so than they even wanted to, okay? They just wanted to play some ska punk songs and have some fun times doing it, you know? But no, they ended up making way more noise than they intended. And like, no. Not now, not now, not ever.
And right as it looked like Operation Ivy was about to be catapulted to success, they broke up. I don't know if this is true or not, but the story at the time was that they couldn't handle the pressures of success and they didn't want to sell out. And so rather than take that route, they just broke up.
I don't think the handling of pressure was really about it, but more so like the snobbish DIY ethics of it all. Like, oh, could you believe that this major record label... Well, no. And to spite it, you know what I mean? Then they broke up. That's kind of the narrative that I believe. But when you think of Tim Armstrong and Matt Freeman, you know that they can handle the pressures of that kind of thing.
Again, I'm not sure how accurate that was, but either way, they broke up shortly before the release of their first and only album, Energy, which to this day, I still think is one of the single best punk albums ever recorded. And that...
He's not wrong about that. That is definitely... It might even be like top 3 punk albums ever recorded, if not like the very, very top spot. I'd have to do some thinking and then some quantifying to come up with an actual answer for that. But Operation Ivy, Energy, yeah, that's way the fuck up there, bro. That's for sure.
That album, along with probably the Mighty Mighty Boss Tones, basically kicked off the entire ska punk scene of the 90s. And with that album being as great as it was and the band having so much success so quickly,
The Mighty Mighty Bosstones, I don't know if I'd put in the same sort of breath as Operation Ivy, but the Mighty Mighty Bosstones do have that like reputation for bringing that ska punk rock energy to the mainstream. So I definitely see like Operation Ivy bringing that ska thing to the underground and the Mighty Mighty Bosstones bringing it to the mainstream, but not really together or linked in any way, shape, or form really. But I guess just through the sheer similarities of the genre, then yeah, I guess they are connected.
you kind of had to wonder, what if they didn't break up? How far could Operation Ivy have gone if they did take that major label deal?
I made that video. I made a video, what if Operation Ivy didn't break up? I forget what my hypothesis was in that video, but you should go check it out.
Could they have been Green Day before Green Day?
I think that was my hypothesis. I think that they were like going to be the next Mantle. And I think he's taking this from my video, if I'm being honest with you.
This song was once done by a band called Operation Ivy.
I don't know, guys. I'm out here on the internet. There weren't too many videos about Operation Ivy and Rancid and that kind of thing until I blew the lid off of that, all right? I am the Rancid guy on YouTube. You type in Rancid. You type in Brody Armstrong, Tim Armstrong, Brody Doll, whatever, into YouTube, my videos come up. And that theory video, that what if Operation Ivy didn't break up video, I'm the one who thought of that what if. I did that thing, Finn McKenty. Now here I am, stealing your content after you stole from me. Stealers steal from stealers. Got it. By the way, that's a joke. I'm not actually stealing his content right now, even though it might seem like it. Notice how I'm pausing and playing and stopping and commenting and all that sort of thing. This is transformative. I am reacting and making my own content, all right? Meanwhile, I am crediting him down here where my cursor's floating, all right? I am absolutely calling out his name, the punk rock MBA, Finn McKenty, okay? So I'm on the moral high ground over here, where this guy's just watching my videos, reading Wikipedia, and then regurgitating it back at you like I don't even exist out here.
And said you have to have all this background. In particular, the values and culture that they came from. The Bay Area punk scene of the late 80s and early 90s was honestly, truly something really special. It was centered around all these volunteer-run spaces like the venue 924 Gilman Street.
It still is. It still is important and special, even though it was even more so back then because of its history, roots, and forming it at the very, very foundation.
The record store epicenter, zines like Maximum Rock and Roll and Comet Bus, and distros like Vacuum. It was basically them building their own vision for what the punk scene and community should be from the ground up, brick by brick, without relying on anyone else. And honestly, it was amazing.
I love how he's speaking from firsthand experiences. Like, when I built up that Gilman, when I put down those bricks by bricks, it was like the most special experience ever.
You know, I'd go in the morning, on Monday morning, and take all the garbage down at the dump.
I mean, Gilman Street was one of those places where it was run by the kids, just totally ghetto, spray paint, you know.
I grew up in the Seattle area, but I basically worshiped that whole scene from 2 states away.
I was even farther away than 2 states, and everybody worshipped that scene. That was the time. That was the nucleus of this sort of thing that was happening. That sort of DIY, hardcore, punk rock, we're going to do this ourselves by our rules and nobody's going to tell us no kind of thing. This was the time and place for that sort of action.
I only made it to Gilman once when I was in high school to go see my favorite band at the time called Spaz. But that whole scene was and is a huge influence on me as a person. And to this day, it really defines my vision of what punk means.
Okay, see, maybe that's why people feel like me and Finn McKenty are similar, because that sentence that he just said about Gilman, about how it defines like what punk rock is and what it means, I feel that way as well, okay? I worship at the altar of DIY, and kind of nothing is as revered more than 924 Gilman in the 80s. Now, Gilman is still going to this day, zines are still being produced to this day, but punk rock has evolved so much since the 80s, so it's just like little pockets of this DIY stuff scattered throughout, and you kind of gotta go around and find the stuff that really like scratches that itch if that's what you're into. But the fact that these guys made that sort of impact in the 80s, following in the footsteps of the DC scene, and just really blowing it up to something generational and special and all their own. Because it isn't a DC scene type stuff, it is an extension of it, and even an explosion of it in a way, a dissection of it.
People can create their own culture. You don't have to wait. You can say, hey, I got something to say, and I'm going to say it.
That's something that like Damian Abraham of the Turned Out a Punk podcast always says at the end of his episodes or whatever. And maybe he doesn't anymore. I stopped listening to him a little while ago. But he used to say something like, make your own culture. Go out and do it yourself. Absolutely.
The point that I want to make here is, make no mistake, Operation Ivy was as punk as it gets, period. They were there from the very beginning of Gilman, and they played with the punkest of punk bands like MDC, Neurosis, Gangrene, Fugazi, you name it. And all of that is really crucial to understanding Rancid.
It very much is. You need to know that Operation Ivy comes from the gutters. It's not a reflection of the gutters. It is a product of the gutters.
Punk rock club opened up in my neighborhood. I jumped on a bus the next day and I headed back home.
And after Operation Ivy, Matt and Tim did a few projects together, but nothing that really lasted. And reportedly, Tim was not doing well at the time. As the East Bay Express wrote years later, post-breakup, Tim Armstrong fell into a heavily publicized bout of depression. Dyslexia, poor grades, and low self-esteem left.
How do you fall into a bout of dyslexia? I got so sad I started mixing up my letters. What? Oh, okay, there's a period there. A bout of depression, period. Dyslexia, poor grades, and low self-esteem left him with no sense of direction without his music. Okay, got it. But I like the sentence more with a comma. Fell into a heavily publicized bout of depression, dyslexia, and poor grades.
Left him with no sense of direction without his music. Alcoholism and heroin addiction took control of him, and he wound up living on the streets.
That so much is very much known about this time for Tim Armstrong at this time. He needed something, and he needed music. And when he's got the music, he's got a place to go, all right? That's what that means, brother. It means something to this guy.
Freeman, unwilling to watch his friend kill himself, took in Armstrong and got him sober enough to stay in a halfway house. And while all of this was happening, Tim and Matt started a few projects together, including an early version of Dance Hall Crashers, but none of them really stuck until they formed a new band called Rancid and released their first EP in 1992 on Lookout, and then in 1993 their first album on Epitaph.
See, that's all the sort of stuff that I would just like skip over. I would just go from the Operation Ivy stuff, saying that there was a little bit of a bout of dyslexia there in the middle, and then Rancid happened. The fact that he said that they tried this and tried that and did a little couple things in between that, that's stuff that kind of goes without saying, but I'm glad that he said it, because if he didn't, then people in the comments are like, hey, what about this thing? What about that thing? I don't know if you can see it. Maybe if I move this over here like this. But you see up there in that corner, I have this record still right there. How do I get there with my finger? Right there. Right there. You see it? That's this album cover. This album means a whole lot to me, okay? It's right here. You see it?
I remember this album being really highly anticipated as like Lint and Matt from Operation Ivy's new band, and the album definitely delivered. It was super high energy punk with those trademark Matt Freeman bass lines that still sound amazing, and as good as it was, listening to it now, it just feels like there's something a little bit missing. And that's...
I don't agree. I think with the benefit of hindsight, we know where Rancid went from then, but this record, man, this record is unreal. Sure, it isn't their best record. They do go on to create like generational, iconic classics, and I wouldn't necessarily say that that's a generational, iconic classic, but it's a street classic for sure, and the nucleus to a lot of really important stuff.
Something was Lars Fredriksson, who shortly after that joined on guitar and vocals. And with the classic Rancid lineup in place, they recorded their second album, Let's Go, in just a week, which is pretty crazy considering that it has 23 songs on it, and it came out in 1994.
Bands' best records are normally the ones that are recorded that quickly. Because Let's Go is my favorite Rancid record, and it was recorded, like he said, extremely quickly. Let's just go in there, bang out these songs as fast as possible. Boom, it's our best work ever. When NoFX did that with So Long and Thanks for All the Shoes, same result. Amazing record.
And this is the album that really put them on the map, especially the second single, Salvation, which was their first song to get any kind of traction on mainstream radio.
That's where I learned about Rancid. It was through people requesting to see this video being played on Much Music. I'm a Canadian boy. We didn't have MTV, but we had our version of TRL, but it wasn't as big as TRL, okay? They would just like open letters and be like, William from Nunavut wants us to play Salvation. So here you go, William from Nunavut. Here's Salvation by Rancid.
A lot of people said like, oh, they're just ripping off The Clash, and I can certainly hear those comparisons. But to me, this album was much more in the vein of classic street punk like Blitz or Cockspur.
It takes that Blitz, Cockspur type stuff and melds it so nicely with that Clash influence, but what comes out is totally unique, is their own identity, and the fact that they banged it out so quickly after recruiting Lars Fredriksson is just a testament to the talent of this group of individuals.
And on the back of their success with Salvation, the album actually cracked the Billboard Top 100. And aside from it just being a great album, I think part of what made that possible was the timing. The grunge band sort of cracked the door open by making alternative rock cool a few years before that, and then Green Day and The Offspring started blowing up, and so all of a sudden the idea of punk bands being on MTV and the radio was suddenly possible.
There was never really an idea that we were going to make it as a band. It wasn't possible because they're just, those kinds of bands were not on the radio, they weren't MTV, they weren't making it. So the first thing that even started to change that really has got to be Nirvana and Teen Spirit.
And just like with Operation Ivy, the major labels started calling. They were very eager to find the next Green Day or The Offspring, and they thought Rancid might be that band.
That is exactly what happened, and Rancid could have very well been that band. But Dexter was saying there that, oh, we couldn't have made it. Being in a band like this, it wasn't possible for us to blow up. But through the 80s, there were rumblings there, okay? Hair metal was falling, and it's not like that Kurt Cobain just put out Smells Like Teen Spirit and boom, all of a sudden grunge. No, it was a gradual incline until the bottom completely fell out. Like Nevermind was not Nirvana's first record. People knew about Nirvana. There were predictions that Nirvana were going to be the next thing, and then Nirvana were not only the next thing, they ended up taking over the entire first half of the 90s, influencing absolutely everything there. Music, TV, wrestling, books, you name it, Nirvana influenced it.
One of those was even Madonna's label Maverick, but Rancid ultimately decided to stay with Epitaph and the punk scene.
Lars of Rancid, Madonna. A few years ago, she sent you some nude pictures, didn't she?
Shared it. Well, just one.
Now, what was the reason of her doing that?
She wanted us to sign on to her label.
All of which set the stage for their real breakout moment and Out Come the Wolves in 1995.
I mean, that would be an interesting way to entice somebody to sign to your record label. Maybe I'm going to start a record label and start sending out nudes to bands to entice them to sign to my record label. Well, I guess I'm not Madonna, so.
Which, in a lot of ways, I kind of look at as the album that Operation Ivy might have made if they had stayed together. The big change in this album is that they added ska back to their sound, and it sounded amazing.
Agreed. This is another point that I think that I might have made in one of my older videos.
Kind of like a more evolved, polished version of Operation Ivy, but without losing any of the edge or energy. Like songs like The 11th Hour, I think could have easily been on Energy, and I immediately loved it.
Pulls the strings!
And I wasn't the only one who felt that way.
Nah, exactly. They got their flowers for this record, which is why I have no idea why you started this video saying that Rancid is underrated and underappreciated. And Out Come the Wolves. Everybody who listens to punk rock music has to appreciate and Out Come the Wolves. You don't talk about the evolution of punk rock music without talking about and Out Come the Wolves. Underrated, underappreciated. Good God, man.
The album hit number 45 on Billboard, quickly went gold. They were on magazine covers, they did SNL, they were on MTV's big alternative show called 120 Minutes.
Yeah, they blew up. They were all over. They were a punk band on Epitaph doing all of those things. People recognize that. You're recognizing it right now in this video and saying it boldly, matter-of-factly, in a video where you started it by saying that they were underrated and people don't talk about them and stuff. Maybe because we're on YouTube and I'm the only one making videos about them that you're thinking that I'm the only one talking about them, but that's not the way it goes, brother.
Rancid was everywhere.
This is Lars and Tim from Rancid, and we've got a bunch of questions from our viewers for email. I mean, one of the biggest responses we've ever had for the show.
And they certainly weren't the first punk band to have that kind of success. Like I said, obviously there was Green Day and The Offspring as well, who are both great and definitely legitimate punk bands any way you want to look at it. But to me, at least, neither of those bands just screamed punk rock like Rancid did.
Right. They didn't have mohawks, I think is what he's saying. They didn't stud their jackets. No, but I do agree with the sentiment. I do think that Rancid is just like a couple notches higher on the punk scale than Offspring and Green Day. But it doesn't take a brilliant punk scholar to come to that conclusion.
This was like full-on Liberty spikes, bondage pants, and spiked leather jackets punk rock. And I'm not saying that the way a band dresses is the most important thing or anything like that, but if you look, I mean, it's obvious. Rancid looks much more like The Exploited than Nirvana or anything else that was cool at the time. And I do think that matters in the sense that it exposed a lot of kids to this sort of lifestyle that otherwise they probably never would have seen or heard about.
That's a fair point, and I do appreciate that, and I also would even say that I agree with it. If Rancid didn't look like the way that Rancid looked like, then maybe I wouldn't have got into all of those different kinds of things that I got into back in those days. I wouldn't have listened to The Exploited. I wouldn't have watched SLC Punk. I wouldn't have known what Liberty spikes were. I thought that would have just been the spikes on top of Lady Liberty or whatever, you know?
For example, in the song Avenues and Alleyways, there's the oi 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 gang vocals.
Yeah, Rancid really did bring all of that punk rock energy and brought it to a new crowd, a younger crowd. Like, hey, all of that 70s stuff, all of that 80s stuff, we're the band doing that now, and we're making it accessible.
And for those who aren't familiar, oi is a specific subgenre of, I guess you could say, like working class punk that I could never, ever, ever in a million years imagine being on MTV or people saying oi on an album that ended up going platinum. And yet Rancid did exactly that. The cover of the album is also a tribute to the classic Minor Threat cover. And so with this album, to me, they proved what a lot of people saw back in 1988. That Operation Ivy's version of punk meets ska had the potential to go way, way beyond the Little Gilman scene. And after spending a few years riding the wave of success that they had with And Out Come the Wolves, they came back with their next album, Life Won't Wait, in 1998. And on this album, Rancid really doubled down on the ska, reggae, and dub influences. For example, collaborating with people like Dr. Israel or on the title track with Buju Banton.
This is a very reggae-heavy record, okay? Now, you gotta be in the mood for some Life Won't Wait if you're gonna go into some Life Won't Wait. But I think it is a solid record from front to back and has some of my favorite songs on here. Hoover Street is one of my favorite songs ever written by any band ever. I love that song.
Which is what I personally really appreciate about this album. They basically put the whole scene on notice about what a legitimate ska punk album should sound like. And what I mean by that is by 1998, the third wave ska punk craze was in full effect after the Mighty Mighty Boss Tones and No Doubt had blown up.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And then bands like Mad Caddies and Real Big Fish and that kind of like really obnoxious ska really started to take over, okay? And that kind of sound was all right, but it was super obnoxious and not really all that punk. That kind of sound, that kind of third wave ska sound was in movies, was in television shows, was all over the place, but this Rancid stuff, this felt like it came from the origins of the genre. It felt like it went to reggae. It felt like it went to the places where these genres were founded and asked permission to borrow them. It borrowed them and sculpted them into something beautiful. That's what I get from Life Won't Wait that I don't get from all the other ska stuff that was happening at this exact same time.
With probably Real Big Fish being the biggest example of what I mean here.
Please welcome Real Big Fish.
Oh, of course he was gonna bring up Real Big Fish right now. They were the biggest example of it. Super annoying everywhere. Look at this, Donnie and Marie over here.
And with all due respect to bands like Real Big Fish and Mustard Plug and all that,
no due respect, Mustard Plug. They put out a record last year, bro.
In my opinion, those bands are not really ska. It's more just like pop punk with horns kind of bolted on. That's kind of like a cartoonish, childish version of the real thing.
I would agree with that completely. That is a very well articulated assessment of what this sort of stuff is. Pop punk with horns tacked on.
To the earlier bands like, say, The Specials, who also had that sort of crossover appeal with punks, mods, and skinheads. And I have no idea if this was their intent, but with this album, I feel like Rancid basically said, all right, everybody, step aside. This is how it's done.
What's a mod? What's a skinhead? You didn't explain what a mod or a skinhead was. What is that, I wonder?
And from a commercial perspective, Life Won't Wait was also a big success, eventually hitting number 35 on Billboard. Shortly after the release of this album, Rancid also moved to Hellcat Records, which was Tim's imprint on Epitaph. And their first release on Hellcat was their self-titled album in 2000, which was kind of a shocking departure for the band. The natural progression for the band would have been to make something more accessible, more mainstream, like maybe try to do some kind of like pop reggae album, but the band did exactly the opposite of that.
They did exactly the opposite of that. And I am so glad that they did. This is what made Rancid Rancid at the time. They defied expectations. They zigged when you thought they were gonna zag. They hit you with a jab when you thought they were gonna go in with a hook. That kind of thing. And the fact that they put out a hardcore record in the year 2000 is what made me absolutely solidify Rancid as probably my favorite band of all time at the time. And those first 5 records, that first chunk of their legacy, is still what holds them in such high regard with me at the top of that list for me personally.
This album is pretty much like straight up hardcore. Almost like their tribute to Discharge or something, with most of the songs coming in under 2 minutes. Song titles that could have come right off a D-Beat 7-inch. Like,
I really wish they would have kept that style and that vibe going. It really suited them. They were so good at it. It is personally my favorite kind of music to listen to. And their 3 voices together playing this kind of hardcore punk rock, Lars, Tim, and even Matt coming in with his songs and backing vocals. Just incredible stuff. Some of the best music ever made.
Like Dead Bodies and Meteors of War.
Dead bodies everywhere! Oh my god, so fucking good, bro.
And cover art that would look right at home on the back of some crust punk's jacket while they're passed out on the sidewalk outside Gilman.
Incredible stuff, man. My god.
And from a commercial perspective, as you would probably expect, this wasn't as successful as the previous album, and it's probably my least favorite Rancid album in terms.
Okay, so this is why me and Finn are very much different people. See, we definitely have that same sort of roots where it comes to the DIY thing, the Gilman thing, but I see this as Rancid's best record, even though it commercially flopped, all right? This is their best stuff creatively. This is their best stuff as a group. But old Finn over here is not going to see it quite the same way because it didn't sell as much.
Terms of the one that I would actually choose to listen to, but I do have a ton of respect for the fact that they were willing to do something so just blatantly anti-commercial at this stage in their career. And after the release of the self-titled album, they also did a few side projects.
Bad take. Whoa, my god, I wasn't expecting like that much of a bullshit take here. But what am I even talking about? Of course I was. But I do respect the fact that they took this anti-commercial route at this stage in their career. Oh, give me a break, Finn McKenty.
Most notably, Tim did Transplants with Travis Barker from Blink-182, which personally I think was brilliant. It's this really strange original mix of like punk and hip hop with almost like drum and bass kind of percussion. I've really never heard anything else like it. And
it doesn't have drum and bass percussion. I know what you mean. Like it has like the instrumentals are based around the bass guitar and the drums, and that much is true. But drum and bass is a techno genre. It's a genre of electronic music rather, which I know nothing about. I just called it a techno genre for Christ's sake.
And if you haven't given their albums a listen, I would strongly suggest that you do because I think they're great.
The first record is good. The second one is brutal. The second Transplant record is one of the worst albums I can ever listen to from front to back. It is painful. But the first one, it's highly creative and super strange. Surprises around every corner. But the second one is trash, bro. Some of my friends sell records. Some of my friends sell drugs.
Lars also had his own band called Lars Fredriksson and the Bastards, which is like really solid, straightforward street punk.
Wasn't the biggest fan of Lars Fredriksson and the Bastards, but I am a fan of them for sure. Definitely spun them a whole bunch, but not nearly as much as Rancid, or Transplants for that matter.
The 3 original members of Rancid, being Tim, Matt, and Brett, did another side project called Devil's Brigade with Matt Freeman on vocals. It was kind of like a punk psychobilly thing.
I never got into that at all. I couldn't even. I should try to revisit it now that I'm an adult man.
And after all of that, they came back to Rancid to make their most controversial album yet, Indestructible, in 2003.
No. I made a video called The Day That Rancid Died. Yeah, they died. This is no longer Rancid anymore. This is some sort of caricature of what you used to consider to be Rancid.
And the controversy centered around this being what some people saw as their sellout album. First of all, on the musical side of things, it was probably the most polished thing they had done so far.
You're gonna be back up again. You're gonna help me back up again. Ugh, well. Blagan, going, get away from me right now.
Which some people took as a sign that they were like pandering to reach this larger audience. And I don't know what was going on in their heads, but that seems pretty unlikely to me, given that 3 years before that, they basically put out a D-Beat album. So it seems to me that Tim's songwriting had just gotten so good that it just naturally sounded like this super catchy, almost kind of pop version of Rancid. But
that is an insane take. That is crazy. He just accidentally wrote pop songs, guys. He just got so good that they came out as polished pop songs. I never wanted to use the R word so much in my life that I do right now. I'm so sorry. Cancel me if you want. But that is crazy, man. That is an insane thing to say. He just got so good at it that it just came across like a pop record. No, man, that was deliberate. He is that good of a songwriter that he deliberately wrote pop songs and asked Brett to produce it like a pop record. What is so hard for you to understand about that? The departure from reggae to make that hardcore record was because they wanted to spice it up a bit. And now they wanted to get on some festivals. Now they wanted to make a little bit of money. Because right now you didn't really mention the distribution deal with Warner Brothers that coincided with his songwriting getting accidentally good all of a sudden. Oh my god, I am holding back the R word, people.
But on top of that, for this album, they were also signed to Warner Brothers.
Oh, there it is. Okay, perfect, but still.
Or I guess more accurately, signed a distribution deal with Warner Brothers.
Okay, there it is. Perfect. Okay, so he does say the distribution deal part of it. Okay, good. Still, the accidentally writing songs that are pop songs thing. His songwriting just got so good by this point that they just came out as pop songs and catchy and with hooks.
But in the eyes of most people, they were on Warner Brothers.
But now you guys have signed to a major label.
We haven't signed anything.
We have some sort of distribution deal, so I was wondering, what nude pictures did you get in the mail that are better than Madonna's nude pictures to make you sign a distribution deal with Sire?
It was the nude pictures of you that you sent me.
So they were now considered...
I like how Lars deflected there, but it pretty much was them signing to a record label, okay? Them doing a distribution deal with Warner put them in all the same sort of stores of Warner bands, okay? I could now go to Future Shop in Canada and pick up the new Rancid release. Isn't this great? That kind of thing.
Which these days is not a big deal at all, but back then it kind of was.
If you can sell, 200,000 CDs on a punk label, that's a great living for the band.
And this was also right around the same time that AFI signed to a major label and got a ton of backlash for that, because in the Gilman scene that both of those bands came from, signing to a major label was like the ultimate sin. As Lars himself said a few years earlier, the one good thing about Rancid is that we never signed to a major label. We stayed indie our whole career. We've shown that you don't need some fucking big major label who you'll end up taking in the ass from eventually to make music. The result...
Oh, I find that quote so hard to digest. It's like you did it relatively indie for a relatively decent amount of time, but for your whole career, I don't know if that's true. Sure, a Rancid record hasn't come out fully on a major record label. It's not like Sony UMG kind of deal.
Also the video for Fall Back Down, which had the Madden brothers from Good Charlotte and Kelly Osbourne in it. Transplants had one of their songs in a shampoo commercial.
Garnier Fructis, the first fortifying shampoo with active...
I know it doesn't seem like that big of a deal in 2024, but in 2004, as an 18-year-old, 19-year-old kid, this sort of stuff just like spit on everything that I thought that these guys were. Everything that these guys said that like, hey, these are the values that we built our whole music on. These are the values that we built our whole lives upon. Then for them to just be like, no, just kidding. That was just to sell music in the 90s. We got to sell music now in the 2000s. So this is just all one big work. And then I was like, oh, punk rock and wrestling are really the same thing. Okay, I get it.
Fruit concentrate from Garnier.
And so the old school fans thought that Rancid had sold out and gone Hollywood or whatever. And obviously I can't know what was in their heads or why they signed to Warner Brothers, But to me, these kind of debates about selling out are just generally kind of dumb. And the fact that they did it is actually at the essence of why I appreciate Rancid so much. Here's how I think about it. If you
Of course, that's why you appreciate Rancid so much. Oh my God. Don't say it, Dan. Don't say it.
If you believe that DIY punk rock is important and you want more people to discover it, which I do, then you should want bands like Rancid, Green Day, and AFI who came from that scene. You should want them on MTV. You should want them on major labels and on the covers of magazines. You should want them in shampoo covers and hanging out with Good Charlotte, because that is exactly what's going to make more people discover punk.
That is great. I do want that. Fine. Go be a representative to the scene out there in the mainstream, okay? But that doesn't mean that I need to like them anymore, because they're making decisions that fly against everything that I am as a person, okay? So yeah, they're shining a light on the scene that they came from, and a scene that means a whole lot to me. But that's not really what I made the connection with. I made the connection with Rancid. I made the connection with the guys that did those records in the 90s. I don't care about all these other eyeballs coming from anything.
Like, we can't just expect every 12-year-old to somehow wander into some legit hole-in-the-wall punk record store and buy a Discharge album, right? That's just not how it works.
We do need our gateway bands, of course. We need the bands that we're gonna like go into and graduate from and move on to other bands. For sure. But you got to understand, once a band moves on from the underground to one of those gateway bands, that their old fans aren't really going to like them anymore. Now their fans are the 12-year-olds, you know? They're not going to be like the hardened people in Gilman. It's going to be like the suburban 12, 13, 14-year-old kids that they're appealing to now. It's a completely different audience. And they're making music for 13-year-olds, not making music for a bunch of crusted out 18-year-old junkies, bro.
Personally, I found punk because I saw Suicidal Tendencies on MTV in 1990 and kind of went down the rabbit hole from there. And I'm sure that the same thing happened with Rancid. Some kid who liked Good Charlotte and Blink-182 saw them hanging out with Rancid, and they're like, oh, who's that? If they're friends with Good Charlotte and Blink, they might be cool. And so then they bought a Rancid album and started going down the rabbit hole. And from there, they got into GBH and The Exploited. I mean, this is how it works, right? Nobody is born with crust pants on.
So these are my pants that I've been patching and mending since 2007. 98% of the patches are all handmade, and when I say handmade, I mean hand-drawn. I didn't use stencils, and I didn't screen print.
And for the sake of not making this video an hour long, I'm going to skip to the last and, in my opinion, most important question. What is the lasting impact and influence of Rancid? And the reason that I called them underrated in the beginning is that even though everybody knows who Rancid is and could probably sing along to at least a few of their songs, I really don't hear their name come up as much as it should, in my opinion.
Okay, so here we go. Tell me why they're underrated, just because you don't hear their name come up as much as it should nowadays. In what circles? In what context? Because I certainly do.
In the 30 years that they've been together, they have not put out a single bad song. And I would put that...
Whoa! What? That is an insane thing to just like flat out say. They've been around for 30 years and haven't put out a bad song? Yes, they sure have. I did a whole video about all of Rancid's worst songs. So go watch that video real quick if you need a refresher on some of the bad stuff that they've done.
A trio of Tim, Matt, and Lars up against any punk band of all time in terms of songwriting and performance.
I feel like Finn McKenty has taken this tone in his video purely to spite me and my tone in my videos.
They are just that good. But to me, the overall narrative about Rancid that really makes me appreciate them as much as I do is that they're really the only mainstream band that stayed 100% committed to punk. Of course, there's bands like Green Day, AFI, The Offspring, Fall Out Boy, and Rise Against, who are all great bands and all came from like legit DIY punk and hardcore backgrounds. And I'm not taking anything away from any of them.
Oh my God, he's like qualifying and quantifying and putting so many caveats on what is going to be a ridiculous take.
But all those bands kind of drifted away eventually from punk as a sound and oftentimes from the scene. Which, to be clear, I have no problem with. I'm not one of these people that thinks you have to like stay punk your whole life or you're a poser or anything like that. But
no, that's true. You definitely don't.
I do appreciate that Rancid is really the one band who never walked away from punk in any way. Their entire catalog, up to and including their most recent album, Tomorrow Never Comes, is punk. Period. The end. They have never done anything other than be a punk band. And even aside from Rancid itself, with Hellcat Records, Tim has put out all kinds of punk bands like GBH and F-, The Business and US Bombs, helping them reach a much larger audience than they probably would have had on a smaller label.
All of that is very true. Yes, they did blow up. They are a mainstream band. They did make punk rock their entire identity and help a whole bunch of punk rock bands. That doesn't mean the last 20 years of their career has been good. All of that was built off of the first 5. They didn't need to put out anything after Rancid 2000, and all of this stuff would have still been true. Did you notice how he didn't mention Let the Dominoes Fall? Did you notice how he didn't mention any of those other records that everybody forgets that Rancid put out? I can't even list them off right now off the top of my head, and I'm one of the biggest Rancid guys ever. Come on now.
Lars has been on tons of smaller oi and street punk compilations. And how many kids bought one of those because they're like, oh, Lars from Rancid is on this, it might be cool. And then that was their introduction to the genre. So ultimately, you can say what you want about them and their music.
I have no idea what point you were trying to make when you were saying that they're underrated because people just don't talk about them. That's just objectively not the case from where I sit. I see Rancid brought up in all sorts of conversations, which I brought up at the beginning of this video, and you still didn't strengthen that hypothesis at the end of your video. You're strengthening my thesis, for God's sake.
But you really can't question their commitment to punk. And for me, someone who honestly, basically my entire worldview is largely based on that specific scene that Rancid came from, that late 80s, early 90s Bay Area Gilman scene, I think that is an incredible contribution to the world of alternative music.
That doesn't mean the last chunk of their career is worthwhile. All of that stuff that they did, stuff that they all did before they put out Indestructible. The majors wanted them in the early 90s before they put out And Out Come the Wolves. They would have been that kind of mainstream adjacent punk rock band forever and a day, and they didn't need to sell out. They didn't need to do that Warner Brothers distribution deal. They didn't need to write that pop album accidentally because his songwriting just got so good. No, his songwriting was so good all the way back in the 90s, all the way back when they were in Operation Ivy. The songs were always there. You don't accidentally just write a pop record. You think Kurt Cobain just got so good at writing grunge songs that Nevermind came out as a pop record. That's not how it works, Finn McKenty, you crazy lunatic. So fundamentally and foundationally, me and Finn McKenty come from very similar spots, but we kind of take different paths when it comes to the whole commerce and creation type thing. He's definitely coping when he says that Rancid 2000 was a bad record and that Indestructible was their best one. Okay, so thank you so much for watching this video. Please remember to hit like, press subscribe, and until my next upload, you can watch another upload. Okay, bye for now.